Good afternoon. Welcome everybody who has joined our event. This event, what awaits the Ukrainian economy in 2025 and beyond, forecasts from experts and authorities. That's every regular event. Every month we are trying to update some small consensus forecasts, and very much happy and appreciate the experts who are actually the best, who can help us to use their products of intellectual labor. And this time, the Center of Economic Strategy is doing a joint event with the German economic team. So thanks to the colleagues, we are happy to share with you what will be the exchange rate, what will be the inflation, whether enough will be money in the budget, and some other interesting things. My name is Maria Rybko. I am the deputy head of the Center of Economic Strategies, and today I will be moderating this event. Some housekeeping issues.
Those of you who are international listeners, for those of you who want to listen this to English, in English, the translation is available in the bottom panel of Zoom.
Also some information to all the participants. Q&A you can leave now or during when the participants will take the floor. You can put it into Q&A or in chat, and then we will be allocate the last half an hour to make sure that the participants of today's event would be able to reply to your questions. So now, once again, traditionally, let us start from the presentation of some generalized forecasts from the non-governmental macroeconomists, and after that we will move to the forecast, which I hope will be presented. Sergei Nikolichuk hopefully will be able to present us the new forecast from the NBU. Then we will have the discussion, and then we'll come to Q&A. So allow me to share my screen now. I hope you can already see it. Please, colleagues, tell me if it's visible. Yes, it is. So, the economy of Ukraine in 2025, economists and authority forecasts. Today with us, we have lots of companies. That's Concord, that's Dragons, that's Vienna Institute, WIIV, that's Kiev School of Economics, joining us with their prognosis, with their forecast, Oxford Economics, Forbes, ICU, also together with the German economic team, the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. So many thanks to everybody, to all of my colleagues. I will not stop at this slide for the introduction. I think it's much more interesting to look at it in the graphs, so we can see, based on the forecasts of our economists, the growth of GDP will slow down. That comeback, which we saw after the big fall in 22, back in 23, 24, unfortunately, it has lost its dynamics, and the median growth of GDP for 2025, the economists are forecasting at the level of 2.3%. In 2026, the situation is likely to improve. We have even the optimistic forecast of growth in case the war is over, and we will see the peaceful agreement or ceasefire agreement. Nevertheless, the consensus is such that there won't be any significant economic growth. With this, the growth of prices will slow down. Inflation at the end of the year will be lower than what we saw in 2024. It's going to be from double digit to one digit, around 9.4%. And in 2026, it will continue to approach the NBU target of 5% per year. By the way, I didn't tell you about GDP, that the forecast of 2025, this is $210 billion of GDP, and that is like a magic figure, because in 2021 in 2020 we had 200. Now Ukraine is coming close to this round figure. In terms of the deficit of the current account,
Немає
it will
якихось
deepen.
хороших новин
We
в
don't
мене для
have any
вас.
good news
І
for you.
я сподіваюся, що нам
And I really
колеги
hope
будуть
that the
коментувати
colleagues that
прогнози,
will be commenting the forecasts
розкажуть трошечки
will tell us a
про
little bit
внутрішню кухню,
about the
пов'язану з
internal
тим, як
kitchen connected with the
дефіцит
way
поточного
how
рахунку і взагалі як
the deficit of the
статистика
current
поточного рахунку
account, how in the
відображується
statistics of the current account,
ера,
they
це
reflect
фінансова
ERA.
допомога, яку отримує
That's the
Україна.
financial assistance that Ukraine has
Що з
received.
цікавого іще в
What's also
прогнозах?
interesting in the
Економісти
forecasts,
вважають,
the
що
economists believe
в
that in
2025 році Національний банк
2025, the
нарощуватиме
National
свої
Bank will
резерви,
increase
а в
foreign exchange reserves
2026
and spend them
вже
in
їх навпаки
2026.
витрачатиме. Така історія теж з
That's
прогнозів мені дуже цікава.
also
Сподіваюся,
coming
що
from
ми
the
сьогодні
forecasts. I hope we can
почуємо
discuss and we
коментарі.
can hear some comments regarding
Гривня
this
на цьому
issue.
фоні продовжить
Hryvnia at
таку
this stage
повільну
continues
девальвацію.
this
Хороша
low
новина, що
devaluation.
очікується динаміка
We
краща
expect the
за
following
2024.
dynamics. Actually,
В
it should be better
2024
than in
девальвація була
2024. The
10%, зараз вона
devaluation
буде
was
3% в
10% in
2025
2024. Now
і
we expect it to
4%
be
в
at 3% in
2026.
2025
Це
and
медіанні
4% in
прогнози,
2026.
тобто
These are the
така
median
рівність
forecasts.
посередині всіх
That's
прогнозів,
like the
які були надані.
average line among all of the
Бюджет
forecasts that we've seen.
залишатиметься
The
дефіцитним.
budget will
Всі
stay
аналітики
with
прогнозують
deficit.
війну
All
у
analytics are
2025
forecasting
році.
war
Не
in
прогнозують, скоріше
2025.
припускають,
They
виходять з
assume, not
своїх
forecast,
прогнозів з
assume. They
припущення того, що війна
take
триватиме.
it
І більшість
in their
також
forecasts
виходить
that
з прогнозу,
unfortunately the
що
war will
війна
continue.
триватиме у
And
2026.
there is also
Це, власне,
an
така
assumption that the
основна
war will
проблема
last
наших
still in
публічних фінансів. І я
2026. And
думаю,
that's actually
що
the biggest problem of our public
макропрогнози
finances.
в
I
тому
think the macro
числі.
forecasts as
Чи
well,
вистачить коштів Україні для
whether
того,
there will
щоб
be enough
покрити
money for
цю
Ukraine to cover
абсолютно
this
величезну потребу в
absolutely great
військових
need
видатках?
in
Половина
military
бюджету йде
expenses.
на
Half of the
оборону.
budget is spent
Ця
on
цифра
defense. This
не
figure
припиняє
doesn't stop
вражати, не припиняє
to
справляти
impress.
тиск на
It actually
публічні
continues to
фінанси
exercise
і
pressure on public
покриває цей
finances
дефіцит в основному
and
за
is
рахунок міжнародної
they're
допомоги.
covering deficit
Але ми
at the
знаємо,
expense of the
що
international
різновидні
assistance. But we
є
know
певні проблеми, і
that
знову ж
there are
таки всі
certain problems
експерти
with the
згодні
international
очікують,
assistance,
що
and all
США
experts say
схаменеться і
that the United
почне
States
постачати
are
Україні знову як
very
раніше
unlikely to wake
гранти,
up and
транші
continue
або
supplying
зброю або
grants
інші
or
якісь види
weapons
допомоги.
or any
Всі
other types of
зійшлися
assistance.
цього разу на тому, що
Everybody
єдина
is
допомога, яку
coming to
Україна
a
побачить
consensus
від
that the only
США,
assistance that
це
that
будуть
Ukraine will see from the
кошти
United
за
States,
кредитом
this will be
ЕРА.
the
І
ERA
нічого
funds
більше безкоштовної
and nothing
зброї
else.
і
No
інших
free of
плюшок
charge
Україна
weapons or
в
any other
26-му році і в 25-му
benefits
також не
Ukraine in
побачить.
25 and in
Це нас
26
приводить до
will not
того,
see from the
що
United States.
потреба у
So that
фінансуванні,
leads
якщо
us
війна
that the need for
триватиме в
financing,
Україні,
that in case
залишається
the
дуже
war
суттєвою. Ми
continues,
бачимо, що на
the need for financing
2026
remains
рік
quite
медіана
significant. We
складе
see that the
53
in 2026 the
мільярдів
median
доларів
is
в
close to
бюджеті
$53 billion
Тобто це
in
дефіцит
terms of the need in
та те,
financing.
що
So
треба
that is the
погасити
deficit and what
державний
is
борг, який
necessary
погасився
in
в
order to
цьому
repay
році.
the state
При цьому на
debt, which is to
26
be
рік
repaid at
такі
that year.
твердих
So for
зобов'язань від наших
2026,
партнерів,
the firm
і
commitments from our
колеги
partners
очікують, що
that the colleagues
надійдуть
are
в
expecting that
вигляді
will come
зовнішньої допомоги, буде
as part
лише
of the international
24
system,
мільярди. Це означає, що дуже
24 billion.
сильний, дуже
That's
великий
going
цей
to be
розрив,
a significant
більший
gap.
ніж в
It is
попередні
much
роки,
bigger than
коли
in the
ми
previous years
розглядали
when
ці
we
самі
saw
прогнози, ці
the
самі
same
графіки. І
forecasts,
тут
the
мені
same graphs.
здається,
And now it seems to me
буде важливою дискусія,
that's
що ж із цим
important to
робити,
have this discussion what we could
і
do with
які є
this
варіанти, в
and
тому
which
числі на
options
певне
are
поведінки
available in
Національного
terms of our
банку.
the
Я сподіваюся,
behavior
що
for
під
the
час
national
Q&A
bank.
ми
I
зможемо
really hope
торкнутися
that
цих тем.
during Q&A we will be able to touch base on this.
Отже, припущення я, в
So
принципі, більшість
my
припущень
assumptions, the majority of
висловила,
my
і
assumptions I already
так,
have explained to you,
трошки,
and
напевне,
some
тут ви, коли будете качати
once
презентацію,
you
зможете побачити всі
download the
прогнози в
presentation, you will be able
табличному
to see
вигляді.
the forecasts in
А
the
тут
form of the
такий
tables.
трошечки
But these
цікавинка
are
для
some
тих, хто дивиться нас
interesting
онлайн,
for the
це
ones who are
минулорічні прогнози, які ми
viewing
робили
us
влітку, з вами вже
online. These are the
зустрічалися на
last year
подібному івенті. І ми
forecasts that we
бачимо, що, в
made
принципі,
last summer at a similar
по
event, and
зростанню
we can
ВВП
see that
до
in terms of
факту
the
був найближче
growth of
Національний
real
банк,
GDP,
решта
the
були трохи
National
більш
Bank was
оптимістичні, ніж
closer, the rest were
реальність
more
виявилася.
optimistic than the
І
reality.
те саме, в принципі,
And
можна
in
сказати
reality, we
про
can say also about
інфляцію,
the
що
inflation
колеги були
that
оптимістичними. Ми
colleagues
сказали,
were
що інфляція
more
буде нижчою
optimistic. They
за
thought
фактичний
that
рівень,
inflation would be
а
lower than the
наблизиться
factual
до
level,
прогнозу Міжнародного
but the
валютного фонду.
closest for the forecast
Тут
was the
про
International Monetary
відхилення
Fund.
також з
These are some deviations. That's what we already talked with Lazar. We calculated some deviations from the last year forecasts. It was also interesting to look at that. But again, this is not most important. Most important is why and which trends are expected in case we stick to the main forecast. Many thanks to everybody for the attention. I will stop sharing my screen and I will come back to Sergei Nikolaichuk. Sergei is the deputy head of the National Bank. And just yesterday, they published a few figures from the new forecast of NBU. The whole forecast will be available when the full report is published, but now we have seen some teaser. And Sergey, please could you tell us how your forecasts have changed and what you expect?
Вітаю, Марія, вітаю, колеги.
Welcome, Maria. Welcome, colleagues. In the first place, I wanted to thank you for organizing this event. That's, as far as I'm concerned, is a great platform to discuss macro forecasts in the expert environment. And I would like to still thank even more that exactly this event is organized today, immediately after our decisions and making some new figures public about the macro forecast, as Maria has mentioned. And that actually gives me the possibility to talk about the most actual assessments and use the freshest, the most up-to-date figures. If you allow me, I will also share my screen and I will share you some presentation to illustrate several issues. Do you see it? Yes, beautiful. So, just yesterday, as you know really well, the National Bank has made public to keep the key rate, discount rate at the level of 15.5% for a longer period. And that decision, in our opinion, has to support the resilience and sustainability of the foreign currency market and hope that it will slowly control the inflation to make sure that the inflation pressure goes down and inflation would be targeted to our target of 5% as within the horizon of our policy. So basically we came up with a strong message that we are ready to keep very strict monetary conditions to the extent that is necessary to make sure we could provide this disinflation trend that shall bring back the inflation to the level of 5%. In accordance to our updated forecast, we will continue to keep the discount rate at 15.5% until the fourth quarter, and after that we will start to slowly bring it down. And you can see on this particular graph, we're expecting that the level of the key rate will remain higher than we expected before in our April assessments. So now I will try to give you some of those macroeconomic preconditions and trends that actually have made this tendency possible and served as the source for our decision, and they served as a trajectory for this key discount rate. What is important to mention from the beginning, that this forecast, our basic scenario, it takes into account the intensification of attacks from Russia onto in various dimensions, be it the front line, in the rear, when we see that they have significantly increased the intensity of air attacks. And we believe, unfortunately, that the security situation, unfortunately, at the moment and in the nearest quarters will be worse than it was evaluated as at April. So nowadays we see the necessity of higher expenditures for defense in the budget. This already pertains this year, meaning that already in this scenario we have taken into account
той проект змін до
that
закону про
draft
бюджет цього року,
changes to the
поданий до
law
парламенту і
that we already
передбачає
submitted to the parliament, and it
400
envisages
гривень.
the increase
Також ми враховуємо
the
те,
expenditures
що
on defense by
наступного
400
року
billion
видатки
hryvnia,
будуть
and
залишатимуться
we
значними,
believe that
тому ми
next
досить
year
суттєво
the
переглянемо
military
правовий
expenditures
дефіциту
will
бюджету в
remain quite
наступному рік.
significant,
Наразі
so we have to
передбачаємо,
reconsider the
що
deficit of the budget for
в
next year. And now
наступному
we
році
believe
дефіцит
that
бюджету залишатиметься там
in the next year, the deficit of the budget will be around 20% of GDP, 19% of GDP. This is our assessment for the deficit of the
І,
budget for the next
звісно,
year.
ключовим
And
питанням
naturally, the
є
key question is
фінансування цього дефіциту,
financing of this deficit.
власне, для
That
того,
is
щоб
to make
пройти
sure we
наступний
could
рік,
go through the following
нам,
year.
за нашими оцінками, потрібно
Based on
близько
our
35
assessment, we
мільярдів
need some
доларів
$35 billion,
частина
taking into account
від
that part
54
from the
мільярдів доларів
54
США, які
billion
ми очікуємо
that
цього
we
року, вони
are
будуть
expecting this
перенесені
year,
на
they will be
наступний.
transferred to the
І,
next year,
звісно, що ця цифра
bringing it
якраз
over. And in fact,
відрізняється
this figure is different
приблизно
by approximately
від озвучених цифр
from the mentioned figures.
консенсусу, там 24
From
мільярди.
consensus, I think it was 24
У
billion as far as I
нас
remember.
і оця різниця
So
між 35
this difference between
мільярдами, які ми бачимо,
35 billion that we see
24
now
мільярдами,
and 24 billion, it's actually is
чорну
different
частинку
by this
складні
black pot. So this is
джерела фінансування
unidentified sources of financing from external financing. Based on our assessment, we have identified 22 billion. Another 13 billion still need to be identified where to find them from. And in case we talk in general about the figures of 2027, the figure is increasing even more seriously. These figures are correlating with those assessments that were mentioned by the government representatives, who also mentioned that 26 and 27, under the condition of the high security risks, we would need some 75 billion, and out of them, 37.4 billion we have, they don't have the confirmed sources of financing. So it's the problem is that assignment over which we all together have to work to make sure we could avoid any complications in the financial and economic domain. But again, I will repeat that our forecast is based on the assumption that the international financing will be there, some around $35 billion next year and some 30 billion in 2027. And once again, this is one of the factors that is one of the important factors, that is to provide the recovery of the economy. At the same time, we believe that this recovery will be limited by the consequences of the war and the negative impact of other factors, such as negative impact of weather conditions and climate change on crops. In our forecasts, we also have reconsidered the assumptions related to crops, both for oilseeds and grains, as well as other agricultural crops, that in our conditions has had a significant impact on the indicators of GDP, which, in our opinion, this year we have reviewed up to 2.1%. That basically more or less is compliant with the consensus indicators. Next year, we can see that the economic growth will be around in the range of from 2 to 3% of growth. And in the first place, its prospects depend on the development of the situation with the security risks and with the fact how quickly there will be a normalization of conditions for the functioning of the Ukrainian economy. Also, it's important, what else is important? that in the external sector, the situation will remain relatively stable. We have revisited and reconsidered downwards the forecasts related to the level of international reserves. Again, take into account that we have significantly increased the volumes of international assistance. That certifies to the fact that the current account deficit, as well as some special components of the financial account, will be worse than in our previous assessments, and that is a reflection of the factor of the higher security risks, more significant impact that will be reflected in the higher expenditures on defense, and that in turn the higher budget deficit will generate more demand on imported goods, both directly connected with the defense as well as the necessity of further procurement of energy equipment. Apart from that, this year we have increased the volumes of supplies of the imported gas for the correspondingly to go through the next winter period. On top of that, we also took into account the losses of our exports from the lower crops, and also we assessed the effect from stopping the trade preferences that since 2022 were implemented by the European Union. Back in April, we looked at this factor as a risk, but take into account that nowadays the long-term decision was not found. Unfortunately, there will be losses for us. We are evaluating them for this year around in some $700 million, and that is the loss of our exports. Take into account that a significant part of the supplies to Europe will still remain, but at the same time, the capacity will be somewhat as a question mark, taking into account that we are in this assessments, we also took into account the possibility of refocus of our exports to some third markets. And our traditional slide about risks of our macroeconomic forecasts, traditionally, probably this is no news, that the biggest impact and the biggest probability we devote to the risks connected with the war, with the possibility of further ruining of production capacities. Also, on top of that, we mentioned the risks of not receiving enough international assistance from the partners. At the same time, both in the first and in the second case, if we talk about the international assistance, we are trying to, as only possible, to minimize these risks. And traditionally, I should also say that we will continue assess all the relevant risks, the probability of their implementation, and will respond to make sure that we could, as much as possible, provide the price stability under any conditions. That's all from my side. Once again, I will repeat, which Marina already has said, that next Thursday we will make our macroeconomic forecast public of our macroeconomic report, and we'll be very happy today and in 1 week to receive your feedback. Thank you.
Дякую дуже, Сергію.
Thank you very
Дякую
much,
дуже,
Sergey.
Сергію.
Many
Я хочу всіх
thanks,
згадати з
Sergey. I would
вами
like to
вже,
remind to everybody,
я намагаюся зараз поширити свій екран
I'm
також.
now trying to share the
Слава вже
screen
скинув в
because
чат презентацію,
Slava has already put
презентацію,
into the
дав
chat the
посилання на
presentations,
місце, де
but the
знаходиться наша
link to the
презентація. Я
place
зараз
where we have our
покажу
presentation,
вам,
I will
що
now show
ми
you
пропонуємо.
what
Це сайт
we are
Центру
proposing.
економічної стратегії. Тут
This is
можна
the Center of
знайти
Economic
графіки
Strategy.
в інтерактивному вигляді, зміни ВВП, інфляції і так далі.
You can see
Подивитися,
the
що
inflation,
демонструє
the
МВФ,
interactive, the
Мінекономіки
forecasts
чи
of the official exchange
макроекономіці,
rate
розглядати
from the
репортів,
non-governmental
кудись
forecasts,
рухатися.
specialists in economics, so you can
Це
see how it
посилання
looks.
вже є
This is the link
в
that is
нашому
already
чаті,
available
і
in our chat,
за цим посиланням
and
також буде англійська версія, не
we
пропустіть.
will also
Я
prepare
дуже
the
дякую
English
Сергію
language
за його
version. Don't
презентацію
miss it.
і
Many
пропоную
thanks, Sergey,
перейти
for his
до
presentation, and I suggest that
обговорення і
we come
представлення
to the
прогнозів
discussion
нашими
and presenting forecasts
макроекономістами.
by our
Колеги,
macroeconomists.
у нас десь
Colleagues,
півгодинки
today
на
we
все
have
про
some
все,
half an
і
hour
прошу
all
почати
in all,
Олександру
and I would like
Петлі,
to
напевне, з
first
ВВП.
ask Alexander
Олександра, the
Petli.
floor
Let
is
us start
yours.
from GDP.
Я всіх
Alexander, the
вітаю.
floor is yours. Welcome to
Дуже вдячна
everybody.
ЦЕСу, що нас
Many
організовує так
thanks for
поговорити про
SES
дуже
for
важливі
organizing
речі.
us
Якщо ми
to
говоримо
talk
про
about these
ВВП,
very
в принципі,
important
Сергій про
things.
це вже
When we
почав
talk
говорити
about
взагалі про
GDP,
наші
Sergey
прогнози.
already started to talk
Ми
about it,
маємо
about
розуміти,
our
що всі
forecasts in
прогнози
general.
основуються на
We have to
певних
understand that all
припущеннях.
forecasts are based on certain
Головним припущенням
assumptions.
взагалі
The
прогнозів
main
зараз
assumption
є
in
справді
general
безпекова
is
ситуація.
the security
Це якраз є
situation.
причиною перегляду
This is
багатьох
exactly the
прогнозів
reason of
і
review
протягом
of many
останніх декількох
forecasts.
років, коли
And
ми
throughout
очікуємо, що,
several
можливо,
years,
війна
when we
та
are
розгортання
expecting
бойових дій
that
закінчиться трошки
the
раніше,
war will
але вона
still
триває
try to
далі, і якщо
finish a little
раніше
bit
там багато
earlier,
хто
but
з нас
unfortunately
припускав,
it
що в
continues to
26-му
last.
році буде легше,
And
зараз
we thought
в
that
нас
in
за припущенням війна
2026,
триває наступного
we
року,
thought
але все ж
that
таки, наприклад,
it will be easier
ми
for us,
припускаємо,
but
що
based
до
on our current
половини
assumptions,
26-го
the
року
war will still
дещо
last in
інтенсивність
2026.
війни впаде.
But we really
Для чого це
hope
важливо?
that
Це важливо з точки
in
зору
the
того
end or
самого
in the
бюджету,
second
про який
half of
колеги будуть більш
2026,
детально
the
говорити,
intensity
того
of the war
фінансування,
will
яке нам потрібне
decrease. It's very
в
important
оборонних
for
видатків.
because
Це
the
говорить
financing
про
that we
те,
need
що
for
взагалі
defense
відбувається в
that says
економіці,
that in
як працює
general what
наша
is happening in the
промисловість і так далі.
economy are working,
На жаль,
how
те,
our
що ми
economy is
бачимо
working
по
and the
цифрах від
like.
цього року, і ми
Unfortunately, what we are
підвищили
seeing
наш
this
прогноз
year,
ЦЕС
and
на
we deteriorated our
2025
forecasts
року до
for the
2%
assessment of
зараз,
2025 to
це результат
2%.
того, що відбувається протягом першої
This is the
половини
result of
цього
what is
року.
happening during the first half of this
Відповідно до
year.
даних
In
Держстату, в
accordance
першому
with the
кварталі
data of
ВВП
state
зріс на
statistics in the first
0,9%
quarter,
порівняно з
GDP
першим
grows
кварталом 2024 року.
GDP grew
В
by
другому кварталі, за нашою оцінкою
0.9%
інституту, це
versus first
зростання
quarter 2024.
1,6%. Воно трошки
Second quarter,
оптимістично, можливо, але ми
it will
маємо
be
зараз таку оцінку. В
1.6%. It's a
результаті
little bit more
зрозуміло, що
optimistic.
на
So
очікуваних раніше
we
близько
understand that the
3% в 2025
expected
році ми не виходимо.
before
Чому це сталося?
3% we
В нас
can't reach.
промисловість почувається
Why
гірше,
this
ніж
is
ми
happening? Our
припускали
industry
раніше. Те,
is
що наша
feeling worse
оцінка
than we
була добувна
assumed
промисловість
before
суттєво скорочується, тому що в
because we
кінці
see
року ми
that the
втратили
extraction
шахти на тому
industry
самому
is
Покровське-Селідове.
decreasing. We lost mines in
Росія також дуже
Pokrovsk-Selidove.
великий удар
Russia
нанесла на
is
видобування газу
making a
природнього. В
huge
результаті ми маємо там
strike
падіння,
on
воно
extraction of
поступово
natural gas.
відновлюється, потім ми знову
Yes, it is
втрачаємо,
slowly
відновлюємо знову.
recovering, but then
Але
it's once
це
again
все
losing
гірші
it and
цифри
recovering again.
показників
But
протягом
these
всього
figures
року.
are worse
Сільське
than
господарство
what we
теж
thought they would be.
почувається не найкращим чином через
The
природні
economy is not
фактори, про
feeling
які
really
от
well
Сергій
because of
говорив.
some
Урожаї в червні
agricultural
почався
economy is
пізніше
not feeling
збирати,
really
ніж
well.
було, наприклад,
They started
минулого
to
року, коли
collect
в нас зростання було
crops in
40%.
June
Зараз ми бачимо падіння, за нашою
compared
оцінкою,
to
близько
previous year.
20% по червню.
It's
І
20%
в результаті
only
це
in
знову ж
June
таки про те,
of
що
collected
ми
harvests.
частково
And this
втрачаємо
is exactly
території,
that we are
частково це
partially
клімат,
losing
частково
territories.
гірша
Partially it's
погода
about
і
climate,
також
partially this
фінансування,
is
яке
about
доступне для нашого
worse
бізнесу.
weather, and
Тому
partially this is about
знову ж таки
financing that
припущення
is
тут важливі
available for our
саме з точки
business.
зору
That's why
безпеки,
the
бо це
assumptions
все
are
безпекові
important from the
фактори,
point of view of the
середньополітичні,
security.
якщо ми
So
говоримо про
these are
сільське
the security
господарство. Коли ми
factors, and we're
говоримо
also
про
talking about
експорт,
the agriculture.
знову ж
When we
таки
talk
на
about
експорт цього року,
exports,
але це
once
колеги
again, to the
будуть
exports of
говорити,
this year,
впливають,
and the
наприклад,
colleagues will
показники того,
talk
що ми
more about
втратили
it,
вже в нас немає
it is
запасів
affected that we
22
don't
року по
have
врожаях
the
зернових. В
stocks
результаті ми
of
маємо мінус по
grains as we
експорту і
had in
також
2022.
зупинилися
That's
експорт
why we have a minus in
трубопроводного газу.
exports,
Так?
and
Це
also we
впливає
stopped
знову ж таки на
pipeline
ВВП, це те,
exports
що
of gas. That
Методологічне
also
питання, яке в
affects
нас
GDP.
виникає як
The
експертів,
methodological logical question is arising. for us as experts how to properly count the defense assistance that is coming to the budget. In the budget, we see it as revenues, and then, of course, as expenditures of the budget. But at the same time, in case we talk about the first quarter of this year, we can see the figures of state statistics that the gross accumulation of the main capital, it grew by almost 38%. At the same time, imports grew by 8.7. Maybe it's not fully rendered in imports, those indicators of the international assistance, but this is a methodological question that needs to be talked about. But at the same time, we want to thank our state statistics that they started to give us statistics much more quick. It's very important for us to understand what is happening in the economy because the assessments is good, surveys are good, but in principle, the assessment of the reporting is much more important. The second assumption, which is very important for Ukraine, and that's what Sergei mentioned, this is the assumption about the international assistance. I will not talk about figures concretely, but it's very important that these black bars that Sergei was talking about, we assume that next year we will get this. In our forecast for the upcoming year, we're expecting the growth by 2.8%, subject to receipt of all international assistance that we need to finance civil budget and defense. So these black bars we have available in figures and in our indicators of forecasts. That's what's important to understand. That's why it's also important that the government would continue all the reforms rather than walking back from what we have had this week. Really bad situation. The trust is important. The trust is built in years, but it's lost in 1 second, as we saw this week. And it's very important here that the reforms need to be continued to make sure we would receive money from IMF and from the European Union, because Ukraine facility and ERA depend on our reforms. An important assumption of our forecasts that we're getting the assistance on time, because we need to complete all of our structural beacons. This time, in the first quarter, 2 beacons were not fulfilled. In the second quarter, also something was not fulfilled. But I would like to invite you to our meeting next Thursday in Consortium for You, where our institute says Dixie Group, and we will be talking about how slowdown of reforms affects economy, and in case we don't get all the money, we don't have anything to finance our expenditures and our defense, and as a result, we will not be able to have that growth of GDP that you saw now on the slides shown by Maria. And that's, again, it's important to say that it's important for us. We need this, and the civil budget is an important source of financing because these are salaries in health, education. This is the state services. They are very important because that's what's, again, the consumption in Ukraine inside. And of course, consumption affects GDP. The labor market is another category which we are forecasting when we are forecasting GDP. Once again, the assumption is that we will not have the massive outflow of people. There will be a certain return, net migrants. That's why our workforce will still stay in the country and the level of unemployment will slow down once again and will decrease. That's again another assumption. Business climate remains very important to make sure that investment can come here. That's why we believe, again, very important, a very much balanced policy of the parliament, the office of president and the government. Many thanks. This was Alexandra Bitli, leading expert at the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. And now I would like to invite to take the floor to make a presentation Alexander Manuilov. He is the analytics at Forbes Ukraine. Alexander, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Many thanks for the invitation. I wanted to a little bit comment our macroeconomic forecast. It seems to me that the key problem is not in the key year. This year, the situation is more or less understandable. We are coming to the growth of some 2% of GDP this year, in the first place, at the expense of low base, comparative base of 2024. Our GDP decreased by 1.1, so 2% we're expecting, not even looking at the quite bad first quarter. because
Але
overall
ситуація цього
it's
року є питання.
0.9%.
Прогнозів
But for the
аналітичних
coming year,
команди Analytical
2026, we have some question
виставили
marks.
невеличке
We,
пришвидшення
as Forbes, we
з 2,3
put in some
до
acceleration
2,5 в наступному
of
році.
GDP from
Це
2.2
перш за
to
все за рахунок припущення
2.5%
щодо
growth of
зростання
GDP next
валового
year.
врожаю, але
We believe
існують
that the
значні
crops will
ризики
be more,
несподівані.
but there are significant
По-перше,
risks
не
for slowing
зрозуміло,
this thing
за
down.
рахунок яких
First of all, it's not
чинників,
clear
за
at the
рахунок
expense of
яких
which
драйверів, окрім
indicators,
сільського
at the
господарства,
expense of which the
може бути
drivers,
збільшення ВВП.
apart from
Як
agriculture,
ми
there could be
бачимо
the
по першому
acceleration of
кварталу,
GDP.
майже
As we
всі
see in the
галузі
first
реального
quarter,
сектору
almost all
БУ
in
виглядають так,
sectors
що
of the real
ефект
sector,
низької
they are not
статистичної
good.
бази минулих
So
років
this
повністю
effect of the low
вгавий.
statistical base of last
Драйверів
years is
це
already
роздрібна
exhausted.
торгівля, але й
Now
вона
we'll
складова.
only have retail, but
Також
it's also
драйвить
slowing down.
сектор загальнодержавного управління, в
Also,
тому
the
числі галузі,
general
які залежать від бюджету.
management
Це
of
освіта
the
та охорона здоров'я.
finances, like
Але в
education
наступному
and
році ми
health, that
очікуємо,
is
що
should also be
ФРС
the driver.
очікують буде
But again,
слабшати,
we believe
а
that next year the
монетарна
fiscal
політика
impulse will be
залишатиметься на прогнозованому
slower
горизонті
and the
досить
monetary
жорсткою. Якщо
policy will
дивитись
be
оцінки організації, то
quite
темпи
strict in case we
очікуваного
look at
зниження
the
облікової
pace of
ставки
the expected
менш ніж темпи
decrease of the
зниження
key
інфляції.
rate. They
Тобто
are
реальна
lower
облікова
than the
ставка
pace
буде
of
навіть
inflation.
зростати
So the real
більше.
key rate will actually be
Тому, на
growing
мій
in
погляд,
accordance with our
існують всі
expectation.
шанси до
That's why, in my
поглиблення
opinion, there are all
наступного
the
року.
chances to slow
Але
down
при
the economy
цьому номінальний
next
ВВП
year.
по
But
25 року
this,
ми
the
єдині, хто
nominal
очікує
GDP, we
вище
are the only
9
one who
трильйонів.
expect more than
Це перш
9
за все за
trillion
рахунок високого
GDP.
дефлятора в експорті. У другому і
That's
четвертому
thanks to the
кварталах
experts. In the
додатковим
second and the fourth
драйвером
quarters, the
дефлятора
additional driver
бутиме
of deflator
зрощення євро, яке
will
відбулося.
be
Воно з одного боку збільшує дефлятор
euro. That
експорту,
is,
з іншого
on the
боку,
one hand,
збільшує
it
дефлятор
increasing
імпорту,
the
який за
deflator of
обставин
export. On the other
благоприємних
hand,
кон'юнктур.
the deflator of
Нагадаю,
imports.
частка
Let me
розрахунків
remind you that
комбінованих
the share
імпорта в експорті це близько
of
третини,
settlements
а в
in euro
імпорті
dominated,
це
it's
близько
one third,
49%.
and in import, that's
Але
49%
врахування
in euro.
зворотніх ефектів
But take into
ми
account the
очікуємо, що
secondary
це
effects, we're
матиме
expecting
вплив на
that this will
зростання
have
дефлятора
impact
внутрішнього
on
споживання.
growing inflators of
Інше
the
питання, яке
internal
хотів би
consumption.
прокоментувати,
The other
це
question which I wanted to comment,
розширення дефіциту
that's
рахунку
the
поточних операцій,
expansion, the deficit
яке
of the
в
current
більшості формується
operations,
за рахунок
which
просто
is at the
гігантського
majority
дефіциту
cases
торгівлі
is
товарами та
formed at the
послугами.
gigantic
Лише
deficit
за
of
перші 5
trade of
місяців він
products
сягнув
and services.
8%
Only within
від
5
очікуваного
months,
росту
it
ВВП.
is 8%
Для
from the
порівняння, за
expected
5 місяців минулого
GDP.
року
To compare,
було 6%,
within five
а за
months of
весь
previous year,
22
we had
рік 9%.
6%, and for the whole
Тобто ми
2022, it was
виконуємо
9.
майже
So
річний
we are
показник за
fulfilling
5 місяців.
almost the annual indicators for 5
На
months.
початку року в нас були
At the beginning
надії
of
на
the
гарний
year, we
врожай.
had some hope,
Зараз ми
some good
бачимо,
crops.
що
Now we
хоча
see
посівні площі
that
збільшилися на
although the
6%,
plantation
а по
area
кукурудзі
grew by
навіть на
6%
11%,
and corn even by
але
11%,
врожайність на початку
but
збиральної
the
кампанії
yield
гірша,
at the
ніж
beginning
в
of the
минулому році.
harvesting campaign is
Станом
worse
на
than
22
previous year,
жовтня по
as
пшениці
at
в
the
нас мінус
22nd July,
18% по врожайності,
wheat we have minus
в ячмені
18% on yield,
мінус 12%.
the barley minus
Ми
12%.
очікуємо, що і
So
надалі
we are
торгівельний
expecting that
дефіцит
even in
буде
the future, the trade
збільшуватися, оскільки
deficit will
споживчий попит,
continue
хоча і
because the
меншими
consumption
темпами, але
depend,
зростає,
although with some
а
smaller
внутрішнє
pace, but it
виробництво
still grows,
зменшується.
and the internal
Тобто
production
попит
decreases.
потрібно буде задовольняти
So
за
the
рахунок
demand will be
імпорту. І це буде
uh,
одним із
will
його
need to be
драйверів,
taken care of
поряд із
at the expense of
необхідністю
import, and
покриття
this
потреб.
will be one of the drivers
Зараз торгівельний
because
дефіцит
they need to
перекривається
fight
за
with the
рахунок
necessity
міжнародної
to
допомоги.
finance the
Але в
front. Now
наступному
the
році,
deficit is
якщо
taken
обсяги
care of with the help of the
міжнародної допомоги
international assistance,
знизяться,
but in
це
case
буде
next year the
суттєво
amount of
спричинити
international financing will
Але
decrease,
окрім цього,
is to decrease,
негативне
this
торгівельне
will
сальдо зменшують і
make
ВВП,
pressure,
як сказав Олександра. У
and this
першому
will, of course,
кварталі, за нашими
decrease
оцінками,
GDP. In the first quarter,
негативний
based on our
вплив щодо
assessment, the
експорту на
negative
ВВП становив
impact of net exports on
10,2%.
GDP was
Тобто,
10.2%.
якщо
That
вплив
is,
чистого
in case
експорту
the impact
по
of net
ВВП був би нейтральним,
exports would be neutral,
ВВП у першому кварталі
the
збільшився б
GDP in
на
the first quarter
12%.
would grow by 11%.
Також хочу відмітити, що ми
Also, I would like
почали
to mention that
рахувати
we
нову
started to
метрику. Вона
calculate a
називається
new
ринкова
matrix.
умови
It's
торгівлі.
called
І за
the
нашими оцінками,
framework
умови торгівлі
conditions of
різко
trade. And
покращились.
based on our
У річному
assessment,
вимірі
the
ціни
conditions
товарів
have
на
improved.
експорт збільшились на
The
3,1%,
average
коли
prices
йдеться за
have
рахунок
gone
зростання
up
цін на
at the
покупку
expense of
кукурудзи
growing
та
prices for corn
соняшникової,
and
а імпортні
sunflower
ціни навпаки
oil.
знизилися
Import
на
prices, vice versa,
3,5%
they
за рахунок
decreased by
нафти. Тобто погіршення динаміки
3.8%
зовнішньої
because of
торгівлі
oil. So the deterioration of the dynamics in external trade is happening in the
Тому
conditions of
в наступному
improving
році це буде
foreign
одним
economic
з найбільших
realities. So I
викликів
believe
для
next year this will be one of the
макроекономіки.
biggest challenges for the macroeconomy. Thank you.
Дякую дуже, Олександре.
Thank
Отже,
you,
ми
Alexander.
дійшли
We
трішки
have
до
come now
платіжного балансу,
to
і
the
зараз
payment
будемо
balance,
говорити
and now
ставки, ціни, курс, до речі,
to
про ставки
discuss the
цікаво.
rate,
У
the key
нас
rate.
просто для інформації
It's very
Сергію,
interesting. Just for information,
медіанний прогноз по ставці
the
НБУ
median
всіх
forecast for the
аналітиків
NBU rate from
це
all analysts,
14,5%.
that's
Ключова ставка на
14.5%.
кінець
The key
2025
rate at the end
року
of
і
2025 and
12,5% ключова ставка на
12.5%
кінець
the key rate
2026
at the end
року.
of 2026.
Чому так? Що буде з
Why
цінами
it
з
is so?
курсом?
What will be
Прошу
with the
Дмитро
prices, with
Круковець,
the
мастер
rate?
школи економіки.
Dmytro Krukovets, expert in macroeconomics of Kyiv School of Economics
По-перше, дуже
Institute.
дякую за проведення цього
Welcome.
фантастичного
Many
івенту
thanks
зараз.
for the initiative
Отже,
to
давайте
run this
поговоримо за
fantastic
інфляцію
event.
і
So
за
let's talk
курси і
about
так
the
далі.
inflation, about the
Отже,
rates and things
інфляція.
like
У нас
that.
така
So
дуже важлива
inflation,
подія. Це
we
те,
have
що
a very
нарешті
important
інфляція
event
почала знижуватися.
that finally the
Після
inflation started to
12,9%
go
в
down
травні, зараз
after
вона 14,5 в квітні
15.9%.
і, скоріш за все,
In
надалі теж буде
May, it's 14.3 in June,
сукупно
and it will
знижуватися.
continue.
Ось. І, як ми бачили на
Cumulatively, it will
слайдах,
still go
показала
down.
Марія,
And also, what you
інфляція на
saw on the
кінець року
slides shown
очікується
by Maria, the
трошечки
inflation
менше
at the end of the year
10%,
is
ну, в
expected less than
середньому там
10%.
варіанти
On
4
average,
місяця,
the median
по
is
прогнозі Нацбанку це
9.4.
9,7.
In the
І
new
це
forecast,
дуже
it's
хороша новина,
9.7
оскільки це
from
дає
NBU.
нарешті можливість
That's great
Національному банку
news because
України
it gives the
почати
possibility to the National Bank of
траєкторію
Ukraine to
по
start
зниженню
the
ставок.
trajectory,
Це трошечки
downward
ось,
trajectory in
одним
terms of
з
the key
основних причин,
rate.
насправді,
One of the
для
main
цього зниження
reasons
інфляції
for
зараз
this
було
decrease of
те,
inflation
що
now
вперше за 3
was that
роки,
for the first
після
time in 3
червневих
years,
підвищень цін
after
на
the June
електроенергію
increases on
безпосередньо в енергетичному
prices on
маркетах,
electric
ставок
energy in
підвищені
23,
цін на
24,
60%.
the
І це одразу
increase of
дало
prices
умову
didn't take
мінус
place,
1%
and
пункту
that
інфляції.
gave a
Це
minus one
важлива
percent
подія.
point to
Ось
inflation. That's an
питання, чи
important event.
чи не будуть
The
ще більше
question
підвищень
is whether there will
електроенергії.
be more
Але
increases
зараз у
in
нас
terms of
сильний
prices
свій
in electric
стопінг дуже
energy,
добре дав для
but
зниження
this
інфляції.
has initiated
Також,
a good
ну, на
downward trend for the
прогнозі
inflation.
ми дивимося
Also,
дуже
based on that
чутливо на
forecast,
ціни на
we're looking
фрукти і
very
на овочі,
closely to the
оскільки
prices for
зараз
fruits
вони
and vegetables
трошки гірші,
because
ніж
now they're
раніше,
somewhat
через, зокрема,
worse than
погані
expected
погодні
before,
умови
once
і
again,
там
because of the bad weather
врожай
conditions
кісточкових, те, що він
and
був гіршим.
that the
Але
yield of the
все одно в
uh,
2024 році
apricots and
були
other
доволі високі
berries was
ціни,
worse.
підвищені ціни на овочі і
Nevertheless,
фрукти
there was quite a significant
в
increase for
вересні,
prices for
ну і
fruits and
далі, березні і
vegetables
далі. Ось. І, скоріш за все,
starting from
цей ефект
September
бази він буде
last
трошки
year and on.
вичерпаний, і це
And
також
I
дасть
think this
можливість
effect of the base
інфляції
will be
знижуватися
exhausted,
впродовж
and
25
this
року
will
і
help
дійти таки до цієї цілі.
to
Але от у 26
inflation to go
році,
down. But in
в
2026, it's very
принципі,
interesting.
всі погоджуються, що
Basically, all
інфляція буде
agree
нижче
that the
10%,
inflation will be less than
що це там
10%,
7-8%,
that this will be
і
like
насправді
7,
війна, вона
8%.
як така
And
не
in
дуже
reality, the
сильно
war as
впливає на
such
інфляцію,
has not
крім
significantly
імпортованої частини,
impacted
але це
the
трошки інше.
inflation apart from the imported
Але вона
part.
впливає на ризики.
But it
І
does
от ризики,
impact the
оскільки ми
risks.
всі
And
закладають,
the
що в
risks,
26 році буде
because
продовження війни,
everybody
уряд
believes
це
that
в
the war will
альтернативному
continue in
сценарії складає, МВФ
2026,
теж
the
цей сценарій
government in
розглядає,
alternative
але в
scenario,
принципі всі плюс-мінус
IMF
згодні
as
з
well.
фактом, що 26 рік
So
це
everybody
обов'язковий
is
рік.
in consensus that
То
2026 will be still the
продовження
war. So the
бомбардування наших
continuation
енергетичних
of shelling of
потужностей,
our energy,
газодобувних
gas
розподільчих,
production
це
and
буде мати
distribution
вплив на ціни, і
capacity,
це
this will of
залишається
course
в
impact
апсайд
the
ризиках.
prices, and
Ось, і це
this
також,
is,
я так розумію,
in the
буде
upside risks,
змушуватиме
and this will also
Національний банк України
force
бути дуже
the
дуже
National Bank of
обережним
Ukraine
в
to be
своїй
very careful in
монетарній
their
політиці,
monetary
в зниженні
policy
ставки.
in
І саме
decreasing
тому
the
ми
rate.
бачимо
That's why we
доволі таку
see quite
повільну
a
траєкторію. Це
slow
теоретично, якщо
trajectory.
брати
So theoretically,
попередні
in case we
роки, там,
take the
наприклад, 20-й,
previous years,
21-й рік, раніше,
2020,
то
2021, maybe
за
even before,
інфляції там
then
7-8% ставка могла
with the
бути і
inflation of
менша.
7,
Але знову ж
8%,
таки
the key
ризики
rate could have been
залишаються,
less.
і
But again, the risks
Національний банк
remain,
буде трошки
and the
більш
National
обережним.
Bank will be more
І
conservative.
тому ми
And
бачимо,
that's
що
why we
ставка буде
believe that
приблизно
the rate will be approximately 14.5% as at the end of this year, and it will continue to go down. We put 12.5%, as Maria said.
У Національному банку я трошки не
The
пам'ятаю
National
по
Bank,
тому
I don't
графіку, але
remember
теж,
now in
щось
that
типу
graph,
12-13%.
so something like 12,
Ось
13%.
дякую.
Yes.
І це, але
But
найцікавіше
again,
в
most
всьому цьому, це те,
interesting
що буде з
in all of
курсом.
this
І тут у
is
нас
what will be
є
with the exchange
проблемний
rate.
нюанс.
And that's where
Як
we
я
have some
сказав, вони
problems and we have
впливають
some
на
peculiarity.
інфляцію
As I
курсу
said, they
резервного
do impact the inflation because of the import component, and we have a big difference between the forecasts of analysts. In 2025 is more or less understandable. We expect 42.4, but in 2026 there are question marks, and this question mark is related to financing. So if they give us the money in the volumes that Sergei has shown to us, this black bar, then the situation can be better. So in our forecasts, we are not putting in, we are putting in quite a limited financing, and low financing, it's about lower reserves. They will be going down anyway. We see this peak in 2025 because of the era shifted, because all of it is 2025, more than a half is 2025. So because of that, we will have also the jump in the reserves. In 26, there will be much less financing, not that much of era will be left. That means the reserves will start to go down. And the question is that in the conditions of the decrease of reserves, to which extent the National Bank will feel good to make sure you could continue interventions in some 3 billion per month in order to cover this pressure of the payment balance about that Alexander talked in the previous part. Our trade balance is actually deteriorating, so the situation is getting a little bit worse, irrespective of the fact that the prices for oil are decreasing and we have better figures on imports. But the impact of the war, that's the imports of the military equipment, it needs to be covered. So that all leads to the exchange rate in 2026, whether those will be 44 or 45, 46, this question remains open. But once again, another question is raised, and in reality, this is the question of the rate to euro. We can see that the euro is getting weaker significantly. Here, there is some peculiarity. This is because of the euro dollar. That is, dollar is stable. We got weaker to euro because of this pair, euro dollar. That's just one more lesson. This pair has become weaker because of the pressure of US president on central bank. And this is like, we know you can't pressure the central banks because you get the disbalance in the macroeconomic stability, exchange rate stability, and all other stabilities. That's why I hope that we will learn these lessons finally. And here the question is to the National Bank of Ukraine, how we are looking at our pair hryvnia to euro, because we are getting to us that euro is getting closer and closer to us. We are aiming to the European Union. We would need to decrease the volatility against euro, and that's where has to be lots of measures that should be in the models, in the proper intervention that will approximate, that will pay more attention to the volatility in euro. I think I will stop here and I will be discussing. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have also some Q&A. There will be a question not only from the room, but also from the ones who we have in the panel. The next part of the discussion, it's about the needs for financing and the deficit and the reality or non-reality of these indicators. Those black bars from Sergei about the assumptions in terms of which we talked. I think everybody mentioned about it. It's something that very much the survival of Ukraine depend on. So I would like to ask two analysts, analytics, that's Olena Bilan, Alexander Parishy, Olena Bilan, Chief Economist at Dragon Capital and member of the CS Supervisory Board. Olena, what do you think about it? Good afternoon. Thank you, Maria. Thanks to all the participants who have already explained. Sergei and other colleagues have already touched base on this topic, but I would like to summarize still, because it is for us a key for the development of economy in the upcoming years. That's where it seems to me that it would be simpler to analyze the figures, not broken down by year, but in general to take 25 and 26, because this year we can get more financing and depend more next year. If we take 2 years at the same time, we cover the period where we have some already confirmed amounts for financing. And these amounts, based on our assessment, they're somewhat more than what was mentioned by Sergey. We expect that around $78 billion we will be able to receive throughout 2 years, this year and the next year, within those programs of support that nowadays already exist. Possibly there are some peculiarities somewhere. Maybe I can see that we have a small difference in terms of our biggest source of support. That's the ERA mechanism, but we're somewhat close in terms of this general amount. And there are not here any big uncertainty apart from one element, that part of this amount is connected to reforms, and that's super important not to relax and continue to do these reforms, because we can see that the European Union, the assistance from the European Union, we have some delay. So looking at the very difficult situation next year, slowing down of the reforms, as well as such steps as going back in the reforms, that can significantly negatively impact on our financing. But our biggest uncertainty, and why we are seeing different assessments in terms of needs in additional, I like to emphasize not the general financing, but the additional financing next year, because now we are not yet confirmed. It's what's going to be with the deficit of the budget, which in turn depends on the military needs. And that's where the independent analytics have to make lots of assumptions, because this military needs, this budget expenditures for military needs that we count on, they depend in turn also on the international assistance, which is arriving in the form of weapons. So I think our general understanding of the situation, that irrespective of the situation that we are getting much less from the US this year, so-called in-kind weapons. So we see the activization of efforts from the European Union in order to cover this gap. And our main assumption, one of the most assumption, that the continuation of the war will be accompanied, that this international assistance in the form of arms will be at least at the level of the previous years, with the bigger share of the European Union. But in general, that is to help us to keep our own expenditures for defense budget at least at the level of this year. And that's also very important. That's a key assumption. Next, some smaller factors are kicking in. Maybe I didn't say it right. They're not smaller, they're still important, but they don't impact so much like the military and hostilities and our expenditures on defense. So these factors are also important. It's how much we will be able to engage from the internal market, what the authorities of Ukraine will do to decrease this need in financing, because we discussed it at the previous event, and I believe it will be a necessity for Ukraine to make a step forward and also to demonstrate that we are mobilizing the internal resources to make sure we can decrease this gap, the need in this additional foreign financing. We nowadays we don't put in any policy actions in our forecasts, because we now don't understand what will be, how it will be, when it will be, in which format. But the resource we see, and the resource in the first place in closing those gaps for evasion, tax evasion, the resource that we also have touched previously, that's the expansion of the taxation base. These are the parcels that are now strongly negatively impact our trade balance, and that's an additional source of taxation that can lower the needs in external financing. and support our
стабільність економіки.
stability of our economy.
Так що
So,
в цьому зв'язку я думаю, що от
in
потреба
this
там
connection, I
13
believe
мільйонів
the
доларів
need
зовнішнього
of $13
фінансування,
billion
які
for the
оцінює
external financing
Нацбанк на
that the National Bank is
мабуть,
evaluating.
близька до того, що
I
Україна,
think
коли
it's
буде
quite close
закладати
to the fact
програму
that
з
Ukraine
МВФ,
will put
ми бачимо
into the
можливість,
IMF
ми
Ukraine program.
цю суму оцінюємо
We
менше,
evaluate this
8
amount as
мільярдів доларів,
less,
але все
around
одно
$8 billion, but
це
still,
суттєва
it's still
потреба у
a
фінансуванні на
significant need in
26 рік, друга
financing for
сума в рік, звісно, якщо
2026
буде
and
продовжуватись війна, то ця
2027. In
потреба
case the
буде
war
ще
continues, this need will
більша.
still be even bigger.
Дякую, Олено.
Thank you,
Я насправді
Olena.
хотіла сказати таку штуку.
In
Мені
the
би
first
дуже
place, I
хотілося,
wanted
щоб
to mention the
Україна
following. I really
завдяки
want that
своїм
Ukraine, thanks
зовнішнім
to
партнерам
its
і
external
зовнішньою допомогою
partners,
могла
external
фінансувати
assistance, would be able
оборонні
to
зусилля не на
finance
тому рівні, на якому мала
defense
би це
efforts,
справитися, на рівні,
not at
який
the level that is
дозволить
done now,
справді
but at the level
перемогти
that
цю
will
війну,
allow
не
to
просто
win, not
утримувати
just to retain
всіма
the
можливими
positions
зусиллями лінію фронту,
with
що
all
дуже
possible
хотілося,
effort, the
а
front line.
щоб нам
We would really love
фізично
that
і матеріально це справді
physically and
досягли. І
financially
я вважаю, що
we
це
would be helped
важливо.
much more. And I think this is
Цей
one of the
підхід
main
хотілося б адвокатувати на
things
всіх
that we would
рівнях. А
want to
зараз запрошую
advocate at all
Олександра
levels.
Парашія,
And now I would like
конкорд-Капітал.
to
Поділіться, будь
invite
ласка,
Alexander
своїм
Parashi, Head
баченням,
of Research at
коментарем,
Concord
тема
Capital.
цікава.
Please share your opinion because it's very interesting to hear what you want
Дякую,
to say.
Марія. Насправді
Thank
у
you,
всіх
Maria.
дуже
In
цікаве
reality,
бачення. Я
everybody
дуже
has
дякую
very
всім
interesting
за
vision. I'd like to
таку
thank
цікаву
everybody
змістовну
for this very resourceful,
дискусію.
interesting discussion.
Так, я би хотів
Yes, I would
поговорити
like to
саме
talk
про
exactly about
нашу потребу
our
не
need,
тільки у
not only in
доларах, євро,
dollars,
там,
euro,
СДРах, так,
and
просто
SDRs,
так
but also
окреслити загальний
to
масштаб
outline the
нашої
general scale of
біри
our
в
gap,
наших, не тільки фінансах, а
not only
взагалі
in our
всьому
finances,
іншому.
but in general in the rest.
Якщо ми там
In case
подивимося на
we
цифри
will
дефіциту
look at the
бюджету, які
figures of the budget
ми всі
deficit
прогнозуємо, там,
that we are all forecasting,
то ми бачимо, що
then
цифри
we
досить
believe
схожі,
that
так,
these figures
і
are quite
вони всі
similar
є
and they
фактично
are quite
похідною
actually
від того плану бюджету, який має
coming from the
Мінфін.
plan of the budget that the
Тобто
Minfin
є
is having.
цифра, так як
So
у нас
there are some
була
figures, as we
фіксація
some
обмінного
time
курсу
ago
долару, так,
we had
зараз у
the
нас іде
fixation of our
політика
exchange rate.
фіксації
Now we
дефіциту
have the
бюджету,
policy of
тобто
fixating
є певний
the deficit of the budget.
дефіцит, який
So there
очевидно
is a certain
погоджений з
deficit
Міжнародним
that
валютним
is
фондом, і
probably
ми
approved with
стараємося
the
його не
IMF, and
перевищувати,
we're
при
trying not
цьому
to
ми
go
сильно
above it. At
занижуємо
this time,
витрати
we are
планові
decreasing
військові, так,
artificially the
і
planned
будь-яка копійка,
costs for
яка
military needs and any
надходить в
COPEC
бюджет
that is
поверх
coming into
отих
the
планових
budget.
доходів, вона
Apart from those
витрачається на
planned
оборону.
revenues, it is spent
Відповідно, у
on
нас
defense. Correspondingly,
дефіцит завжди
our
залишається
deficit will
стабільним,
remain stable,
але
but
доходи у нас кожен рік
the
перевищують
revenues every
планові
year are
показники, і витрати
exceeding the
кожен
planned
рік
indicators,
приблизно на
and
ту
the
суму перевищують планові
expenditures
показники.
also exceed
І
the planned
це не дає
indicators.
нам змогу
And that
оцінити
doesn't give us the
весь
possibility to
масштаб
evaluate the
проблеми, а
whole
він, як
scale
на
of the
мене,
problem.
досить таки
And to me,
серйозний.
it's quite serious.
Якщо ми подивимося
In
на
case we look
24
at
рік, то
at
там у
2024,
нас видатки на
that's where
оборону і
we see the
безпеку складають
expenditures for
приблизно
defense and
70
security.
мільярдів
They
доларів.
are like $70
Всі
billion.
інші видатки десь
The rest,
42. При цьому ми
around
розуміємо,
42.
що не вся
With this, we
військова
understand
допомога
that not all
проходить як
international
доходи
assistance
оскільки
is coming
видатки
as
державного
revenues and then
бюджету.
it's expenditures on the state
І ми
budget.
бачимо досить такі
And we see quite
глибокі дані від того
deep
ж
data
інституту
also from the
Кіль.
Institute
І
of the
ми
Kiel,
можемо так
and
оцінити,
we
що
can
наші витрати
evaluate
на
that
оборону і
our
безпеку
expenditures
минулого
for
року
security and
склали десь
defense
приблизно
last year
95
were
мільярдів
around
доларів. В
$95
цьому
billion.
році, скоріш за все,
This
це
year,
буде десь
most likely
100
this will be
до
around
105 мільярдів доларів.
105
Наступному
billion
році,
US
ми
dollars.
чули,
Next year, we also
здається, вчора
heard,
чи
I
позавчора
think
заяву
yesterday or the day
нашого
before
нового міністра
yesterday,
оборони,
the
що потреба може сягати 120
statement from
мільярдів
our
доларів.
new Minister of Defense
Я
that they need
думаю, так,
maybe
десь 110-120,
around
якщо не
$120
буде суттєвих
billion.
змін
So
у
that's what I
ході
think.
ескалації, нам
110,
дійсно
120, if there are no
знадобиться.
significant changes and
І, якщо
significant escalation,
дивитися
yes,
на
we
ці
will need
цифри,
about
так,
that
то
amount.
умовно у
In
нас
case we
там
look at
100
these
мільярдів
amounts,
на оборону і 42
conditionally,
мільярди
100 billion for defense and $42 billion for the other needs of the state budget. With this, since we are collecting, how much we are collecting by taxes, dividends, fees, at the expense of NBU, this year, I think some 55 billion we will collect. That is, the gap is approximately 142 minus 55. That's like much more than that figure in terms of financial deficit that we could see in the Minfin reports. So the total need of Ukraine in external assistance and the both financial and the military is on average for 2024, 2025, 2026, that's approximately $90 billion. Truly, we are seeing that through mainly through ERA and through Ukraine facility, this year we will close the problem at the expense of these two. In the first place, in terms of the financial part, also the military assistance, even from the United States, from the US, is still coming because there are some balance from the previous years, and we hope that the new administration will still provide us based on some new programs of the assistance. But again, the biggest question right now, it's the financing of war in 2026, because the need in general, both financial and military assistance for next year can amount to $100 billion. And how to cover this need, unfortunately, this is a big question mark. That's all from my side for the time being.
Дякую дуже, Олександре.
Thank you, Alexander. And
Якщо хтось
now, colleagues, in
хоче
case
у вас
anybody would want
прокоментувати те,
to
що було
comment
сьогодні
what has been already
сказано,
mentioned
потрібно
today
до 2
as short
хвилин, щоб
comments to
по
like 2
основних
minutes
тезах
in terms of main
по
topics
прогнозах,
or in terms of
то, будь
forecasts.
ласка, піднімайте
Yes,
руку вашу
please do so. Raise your
Олександра,
hand.
і
I can
можливо
see
ще
the
хтось сьогодні з
hand
нами
of
ще
Alexander.
Євгенія Сліпцова і
Who is else
Ольга
with us?
Піндюк.
Evgenia
Ольга
Sliptsova and
Піндюк
Olga
хоче
Pindyuk.
сказати
Also,
трохи.
Dmitro Krukovets want to
Оля,
say something.
Оля хоче
Okay,
також
Olga, the floor is
такі
yours.
3
Okay,
коментаря по парі
so 3
хвилин, щоб ми
comments,
будемо
a few minutes each,
закругляти цю
and we will
частину.
be rounding up this part. Alexandra, please, the floor is
З
yours.
приводу міжнародної допомоги,
From
те,
the
що я
point of view of
буду
the international
коментувати,
assistance,
те, що
what I would like
глобальна
to add
надія на новий
is I
інструмент,
have hope
механізм,
for the new
який
instrument,
запроваджено зараз,
this
буде
mechanism that is
запроваджений в
implemented
Європейському Союзі,
by
це SAFE,
in the European
Security
Union.
Assistance for Europe,
It's SAFE,
що в рамках
security
цього
assessment for
механізму ми
Europe.
просто
So
будемо
in the framework of
отримувати
this
справді
mechanism, we
військову
will be getting
допомогу, яка
really the
частково
military assistance
замістить
that will be
ті
partially
видатки, які ми
substituting
здійснювали
those
в грошовому
expenditures
вигляді
that we conducted in the monetary
з
forum
нашого бюджету. Тобто,
from our
нарешті, наші
budget.
податки
So
частково
finally,
будуть
our
йти не тільки
taxes
на
will be
військову
partially be
допомогу, а
going not
на
only for the
цивільний
military
бюджет.
assistance, but also for the
А в
civil budget.
результаті ми отримаємо більше
As a
допомоги
result, we
саме
will
з
get more
європейської
assistance
сторони.
from the
Але
European
саме з
side.
точки зору
But
цієї, тобто
from
це
the
такий
point of
просто
view
в
of
мене
this,
оптимізм,
this is a
напевно.
little bit more
Тут
optimistic.
є рішеннями важливі
There are
саме
some
наших
decisions which are
всіх
very important
членів Європейського
of all
Союзу,
members of the
оскільки
European
рішення
Union,
про те,
because the
яким чином нам
decision on
допомагати в
in
межах
which way
СЕЙФ,
to help us
приймають
within
саме
SAFE,
кожна окрема
it should be
країна-член
made by
Європейського
each
Союзу.
separate
І
country,
тут дуже
member of the European
важливо буде
Union.
робота
And
саме
that's very important. There
уряду
will be a
і
work of the
взагалі
government
не тільки
and
Міністерства оборони,
not
я
only the
думаю, з
Ministry of
нашими
Defense,
партнерами для того, щоб вони
with our
пришвидшували
partners
свої
to make
рішення про
sure
те,
they
щоб
could
нам
speed up their
допомагати. Це
decisions to help us.
механізми буде, коли вони закуповують зброю де-інде,
It's
виробляють
when they're
самі, нам
buying
передають,
weapons,
купляють те, що вироблено в
buying and then passing
Україні
on to
і так
us.
далі. Тобто тут є різні механізми
So there are
підтримки,
different
але це те,
mechanisms of
що
support,
єдиний
but
механізм, скажімо так,
the
який
only
зараз
mechanism
вже
that now
певним чином
already
починає
to a certain
напрацьовуватися в
extent is
Європейському Союзі,
starting
який
to
нам
be
може
building
допомогти
up in the
наступного
European
року по
Union that can really
фінансуванню,
help us
мені
next year in
здається,
terms
це
of
цей.
financing.
І саме
Seems to
через
me
це, знову
that
ж таки,
it's
хочу
exactly
наголосити, що
this.
нам треба
And
дуже
because of this, I
послідовно
want to
дружити з
emphasize that
нашими
we should be
міжнародними
very
партнерами і не руйнувати довіру.
conscient,
А Просто тому, що інакше в
We
нас
should
зараз
not
поки що
ruin the
інших
trust of our
механізмів
international
допомоги
partners
поки що немає.
because we
Тому що
simply
рік
don't have
тому
any
ми вже мали
other
інформацію про те,
mechanisms
що
of
буде
assistance.
ера,
Just
про
1
те,
year
що
ago,
буде
we had the
такий
information that there
250
will be
мільярдів,
ERA,
ми будемо
that this will be the
отримувати.
mechanism of
Другий
50
механізм,
billion,
про який,
we
я
will get
думаю,
it.
Марія могла
The
би
second
набагато більше
mechanism
розказати, це російські
that Maria
активи.
could talk more
Вони
about
все
it,
ще
it's
тільки
the
в
Russian
обмеженому вигляді
assets.
працюють на нас.
They're
Тобто
still
хочеться, щоб
working in
Європейський
the
Союз і
limited
інші
form.
партнери почали
We want
активніше саме
that European
допомагати
Union
нам за
and other
рахунок цих
partners would
коштів. Там
help
є
us
різні
more
механізми,
at the expense of
фінансування і так
these
далі.
funds. There are
Але
various
це все
mechanisms
треба буде
related to
ретельна
taxation and the
робота
like,
і
but
з нашими
this
партнерами для того,
requires a
щоб вони
scrupulous work
продовжували
with
це
our
робити
partners to
і
make sure that they
нагальність
continue
цієї
to do
допомоги
this,
вони
and
відчували,
the
що вона дуже
urgency of
потрібна.
this assistance, they must feel that it's very much necessary.
Дякую дуже, Саш.
Thank
Дмитро, будь
you,
ласка.
Olexandra. Dmitro, the floor is yours.
Дякую. Так, я хотів
Thank
трошки
you.
прокоментувати про
Yes, I
ВВП.
wanted to
У нас
comment a little bit
трошечки
about
більш
GDP.
оптимістичні оцінки
We
на
have a
25
little bit
рік
more
і 26.
optimistic assessment for
Ми
25 and
просто
26.
бачимо, що
We are
і
just
віримо
saying
в розвиток
that,
Defense
and we
Tech
believe
і
in the development
нарощення
of
виробництва,
defense,
враховуючи, зокрема,
tech,
справи з
and the
протистоєю,
growing of production,
то все ж
growing
таки це
exports.
може бути
So
драйвером
still,
економіки,
this could
який
be a driver of
додасть
economy
певний
that
буст
will
ВВП
add
і ось наш manufacturing
a
буде
certain
витягати. І плюс, наскільки я
GDP.
розумію, у
And as
нас,
far as I
в принципі,
understand,
один з єдиних варіантів
one of our
розвиватися і
options
нарощувати
is to
продуктивність, це
develop
нарощувати
and to
продуктивність
grow
саме
the
в
productivity, is to
секторі
grow the
високододатної
productivity
вартості,
in
в
the
секторі
area
саме
of
мануфактуринг. Тому я
high
думаю, що
added
на це
value
би направлена
that's
політика
manufactured in the first place.
уряду
So
і
this is the
багато
policy of the
ресурсів.
government
А другий
and a
момент
lot of
про
resources.
нестачу коштів.
The
У нас
second
оцінка було
aspect is about the
17,7 мільярдів.
deficit of funds. In our
Це
assessment, this was
більше, ніж в
17.7
Олени,
billion.
і ми
That
дискутували, за
is
рахунок
more
чого.
than
У нас
Olena.
є така
And why we
історія,
discussed
що
it,
ми не
we
дуже
have
віримо,
the
що в
understanding that
нас
we don't really
залишається
believe
багато простору
that
для
we'll have lots of space
нарощування
for growing
government bonds,
government bonds
ОВДП, без втручання
without the
Національного банку,
intrusion
от як
from the
минулого
national
разу
bank,
з
like
часткою
last
резервів
year with the
банків, котрі
share
можуть
of the
мати
provisions of
виробничими
the banks
ВВП. Тобто, якщо
that can
подібного
have
рішення не буде, то у нас
benchmark government
доволі, мені
bonds.
здається,
So in
обмежений
case we
простір для
don't
того, щоб
have
нарощувати
this
внутрішній
decision, then we have a limited space to grow
запрошення.
internal
Ось, і, можливо, це буде якраз проблемою
engagement.
в контексті, що ми не показуємо якийсь
And
результат
this will be the element
в
that we're not
контексті
showing some
оптимізації
result in the
коштів
context
всередині.
of optimizing funds in the
Дякую, Дмитро.
inside the country.
Ремарка від Ольги.
Dmitro, and remark from
Дякую.
Olga.
Коротка ремарка з приводу
Some
Європейського
short
Союзу
remark
як
in terms of European Union
надавача коштів, в тому
as
числі
the
на
provider
оборону.
of
Зараз в
funds
Європейському
for the
Союзі дуже
defense.
активно
Now in the European Union,
формується
very actively
власна
they
оборонна
form
стратегія,
the
і
defense
частиною є
strategy,
також відповідна
and
промислова
also part of
політика.
it is the
Є
industrial
Україна,
policy, and
наскільки
Ukraine,
це бачення тут, в принципі, дуже поширене,
and
буде
we
дуже
can see
важливим елементом
that it will be a very important element of the
стратегії
good
і
European
оборонної промисловості.
defense
Тому я
strategy.
думаю, що частина
So
коштів
part of the
чи
funds,
напряму у вигляді озброї
either as
in kind,
weapons
чи у
in
вигляді
kind
коштів, які будуть
or as funds
надаватися
that will
Сполученим
be
Штатам в
provided
обмін на
by the
зброю,
United States
це вже закладено
in
частково
return
у
for
бюджетах,
weapons. This is
які
partially
видатковують на
included in the
оборону.
budget
Тобто, я думаю, що
addressing
це
the
по суті
defense.
єдиний
So in essence, this is the only
додаткове джерело, на
additional
яке Україна може розраховувати,
source
але воно
which Ukraine
може
can
бути
count
досить
on,
істотним.
but it
Тому
could be
що
quite
в Європейському
significant
Союзі
because in the European
дуже чітко
Union,
розуміють
very clearly they understand
якби новий геополітичний розклад.
the new geopolitical order.
Україна і
And
Європейський
Ukraine
Союз,
and the European Union,
в цьому човні вдвох, і
they're
вони
in
один
this
одному
boat
потрібні.
together,
Тому
and they're
дуже
necessary to
сильний
one another.
з точки зору
That's
політики,
why
дуже сильна
very strongly from the
мотивація
point of view of the
багатьох
policies,
членів
very strong
Європейського
motivation
Союзу,
within a lot of members of the
сформувалася
European
так звана
Union.
коаліція
They see
бажаючих
this
країн,
coalition
які
of the
мають
wishing
більшу
countries
одностайність
who
в
have
плані
better
їхнього відношення до
uniformity
оборонної стратегії
in terms
підтримки
of how
України. І
they
тут,
treat
я
the
думаю, є
defense
сильні шанси для
strategy
України. І
supporting Ukraine. There are
це
good
має
chances for
безпосередньо
Ukraine,
також
and
відношення
that
на
also has a lot to do with
драйвери росту,
the
про які
drivers of
багато
growth
зараз
that
говорили, питання
many
були Q&A,
speakers have
тому
talked about,
що
and there was also a Q&A question about that,
Україна, в принципі,
because Ukraine, in
може
principle,
дуже
can
прискорити економічне зростання вже наступного року,
accelerate
якщо
economic
будуть
growth already next
знижені
year in case
безпекові ризики.
significantly security risks are
Є
going
те,
down.
що казав попередник,
So that was told by
це
my
high-tech,
colleague.
defense, це
High-tech,
дуже
defense,
перспективний сектор, в який
these are
дуже
very
заходять
promising
інвестиції.
sectors. which already see investments.
Не дуже добре бачимо в статистиці.
We don't see that much in
з об'єктивних
statistics,
причин.
but for objective
Також те,
reasons,
що
and also
ми
that
зробили багато політичного
we
галасу
made a lot
за
of
критичні
political
мінеральні ресурси.
noise about
Зелена
this critical
енергія.
mineral
Україна
resources,
має
green
багато
energy.
потенціалу,
Ukraine
і
has a
якщо
great
буде
potential,
прибрано цей
and in
величезний
case
бар'єр у вигляді
this huge
військових ризиків,
barrier
хоча б
in
якоюсь
the form
мірою,
of
тоді
security risks to a certain
економічне зростання
extent,
може суттєво прискоритися, тому що
so
прийдуть
the economic growth can significantly
прийде
accelerate
приватний капітал,
because there will be
який,
more private
в
capital coming
принципі,
in,
дуже зацікавлений, якщо б
which is very
була
much
менші
interested
ризики для цього.
in case there will be
Оля,
less.
не уявляєш, наскільки приємно чути це
It's
з
a great
Австрії,
pleasure. You
не з
can't even
Брюсселя,
imagine
як це
to hear it
звичайно.
from Austria, not from
Дійсно,
Brussels,
це
as
так.
it's
Це,
often
на
happening.
мій погляд,
Yes,
я так
that's really
дозволю
true.
собі теж
In
маленьку
my
ремарку,
opinion,
така
I
як
would also
люд-літератора,
allow
як
myself
аналітика.
some
Дуже
small
класно, якщо во
remark
всій
as from the
країні
moderator and
підтримують
the
модель,
analytic.
коли
It
вони
would be
дають
great if all
гроші на
countries
зброю
support
для
the
України, яка
Danish model when
виготовляється
they
в Україні.
provide
Це дозволяє
money
і
to
рости
Ukrainian weapons
економіку,
produced in
розвивати наш
Ukraine that
потенціал
helps to accelerate the economy and to grow our
захисту
potential of the future
майбутньої
protection
частини архітектури захисту
of the
Європейського Союзу. Це надважливо зараз для
future
я думаю, що
architecture of
кожен
defense for the European
зібрався.
Union. So I think this is
Зараз
quite
я
actual for
хочу передати
everybody.
слово
And
для
now I would like to
завершення
pass the floor
цього
to
раунду
complete
перед
this
Q&A,
round
перед Q&A,
before Q&A to
представнику
a
German Economic
representative of
Team,
German
це
economic
Гаррі
team.
Полушкін, менеджер
That's
по
Gary Palushkin,
Україні.
the manager for Ukraine.
Gary, please, the floor is yours. What do you think of this round of macroeconomic forecasts?
Thank you very much. Warm welcome from Germany to all participants of this webinar. This forecast webinar provides an important opportunity to bring in key macroeconomic experts and exchange views on the outlook for Ukraine's economic development. In Germany, similarly, there is also a regular joint economic forecast series conducted twice a year and acts as a point of reference for the forecasts made by the German federal government. And this is a result of the dialogue between different independent economic research institutes exchanging views on forecasting approaches. Today's webinar, organized by the Center for Economic Strategy, also puts independent expert views in the center of the discussion. So this webinar is clearly EU best practice. The importance of independent views was clearly illustrated today. The government forecast for 2025 of 2.7% is more positive than any forecast by the independent research institutes. And this result highlights the importance of today's discussion between independent institutes and the government. So all in all, Ukraine is estimated to remain more than 11% below pre-war level, even in 2026. And so we all know Ukraine's economic outlook for 2025 and 26 reveals a very challenging path ahead. This again underlines the importance of today's discussion. And so thank you very much to the Center for Economic Strategy to bring in such important macroeconomic experts.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you for your support to our activities. Зараз я, напевно, знову пошарю
And now
свій
I would like
екран
to once again share my screen with our forecasts of all our independent non-governmental economists and the forecast of the National Bank. You can see how the line is moving on this graph, depending on who is forecasting and what. And we'll be slowly going to our Q&A. I think that the first question, and I would like to address to Sergei Nikolaichuk. We only have 15 minutes left, so let's do it in a blitz format. Sergei, we are seeing this gap. I will now come to it, and your black bars with the assumptions about international assistance. What will be the response of the National Bank, as you see the response of the NBU to different options in case this identified assistance comes or doesn't come? What will the National Bank do? Our basic scenario exactly reflects our vision, what we will be doing in case this need is closed, and in reality, these also other assumptions. Of course, this is not the case, and we will be every meeting this function of response will be adjusting it. What will be in case the volume of international assistance is not sufficient? Well, we have already gone through such periods, and this was when there were cases when the assistance was not sufficient temporarily, like in the beginning of 2023, when the rhythm of financing was violated. So the Ministry of Finances, we had to work on some solutions in order to avoid gaps in financing. We had periods when the volumes of assistance, of international assistance, were not enough, and the Ministry of Finances had to do lots of borrowings on the internal market. This was happening in the end of 2023, also in 2024, and correspondingly, we also worked on some decisions related to use the mechanism of mandatory reserves in order to improve the potential for engagement on the market, from the market. We have certain action plans in case the situation is international assistance is not enough. We have to clearly understand. So using these additional instruments of monetary, they will have consequences in the development of the financial market and support of the financial sector from the economical point of view. So everything has its own price. Unfortunately, there is no free of charge lunch, and correspondingly without the international assistance in those volumes that were also mentioned for the base scenario. Unfortunately, we would need most likely to conduct a more strict monetary policy and more measures to be applied to support the budget via various mechanisms. And that's where it's important to mention, although it was talked about today, and I would like to mention this in our risks, that our important question remains not only the finding and closing these black boxes that everybody talked about today, because we have some unidentified sources for the time being, but it's also important for us in the first place to provide execution of our obligations in front of our international partners in order to receive and to implement those commitments that we have made, that we have committed to our international partners. And the second, unfortunately, the war is still ongoing, and we do have risks connected with the fact that our needs in external financing can be even more under the condition of the realization of additional security risks. And truly here I would agree with Alexander Parashi that throughout the previous years we had this experience when we had to increase the expenditures on defense or on some other objectives. That's why we have to be ready for the development of these scenarios and to have a certain plan B. Thank you. That's it from my side. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Plan B. That's good in case there is plan B, that is in principle can exist. And that is something that we have international partners that can exist. I have one question which I want to address to all analytics who want to comment it. Olena Bilan has already commented, but I would really love to hear everybody's opinion very quickly. The question is from Alexander Bernisky, Liganet. Half a year ago, at a similar event of CES, there was an opinion about that we have exhausted the drivers of economic growth. I think the situation has deteriorated since then. The state didn't do anything to improve the situation. What important we have not done? What could have been done in case we would have time and inspiration? Please, could you tell me a few words, Olena, please, the floor is yours. Yes, thank you, because yes, I raised the last time this topic that non-military sources of growing beyond the military complex, they are exhausting. My opinion has not changed since then. They basically have already been exhausted. What we are talking about in more specific, that in 2023 and in 2024, the main factors that has significantly supported the economy were, in the first place, adapting to the conditions of war in 2023. In 2024, this was also opening of ports, sea ports, for the wider exports of all goods. Now, out of these two drivers, we don't see any more positive. I mean, they do exist, they continue, but they don't already influence the growth. It's important that we're saying that how much the economy produces, but we're talking about the increase of that production. So the increase of the production is actively happening in the military complex. We don't see all the picture, but we understand, at least from the comments of our officials, that last year this sector provided for the third of the economic growth, 1 percentage point from 2.9. What has happened this year? The pace of growth have slowed down from the past, but there are some objective reasons which are not worth saying that something was not done by the government. The problem is that this year we had damages of the critical infrastructure. The stop, as Alexandra said, the only mine that produced coking coal. So these are all the risks of the implementation connected with the war, and we can't say that something was not done. Definitely, in case we think where to direct our support, either to the military complex or to the rest of the economy, then the choice is evident. We know super important to have more weapons of the internal production, and that's why that the government will direct effort in this area in the current conditions. I think this is absolutely an adequate policy. That's why definitely there's the possibility to grow pace of growth outside of the military complex, but I think lots of factors that are limiting this growth, very objective factors. This is the lack of workforce, is some additional losses of assets, so to cover them with some measures of policy will be quite difficult. It doesn't mean that you should not do such policy measures at all, but I just want us not to have illusions that in the conditions of the war, you can provide some very active economic growth, knowing that there could be the shelling of warehouses and the like. So here, there would be a great assistance of insurance of military risks, but we also understand that it doesn't depend only from us, from the government, or from the authorities of Ukraine. That's a complicated question, and the issue of financing is also there. It's an important component. And just two words about the external trade, because I think it's also an important question. This was from Alexandra. The question was, is there Is it critical for the Ukrainian economy? The acute growth, a significant part of this deficit is structural, and it's also a consequence of and why this year we are seeing such a significant growth of the deficit of the external of the foreign trade. It's several factors. In the first place, we have exhausted the stocks of grain because last year, at the beginning of the year, we exported what we accumulated while the ports were closed. So this year, this factor is gone. The harvest is no good. So we are at a new equilibrium, but it's lower than what we saw in the previous years. Secondly, imports. We see the significant growth of imports, and there is some good news and some bad news. The good news is that the imports of machine building is growing. In part, that is very much useful for the economy. That's the import of the energy equipment, and we see that it's not only for repairs, which is also very important, but it's also for the activization of investments in the development of the energy sector. Batteries, gas piston units. So all of it is not bad imports. There's nothing bad about it. Moreover, that it is covered by the inflow of capital and is financed partially at the expense of the assistance of our international organizations. The second part, imports, is also very useful, and that's also the imports of machine building. We can see the active growth of imports of goods, what we call the dual-use products. That is partially drones, something similar to that, that is also basically a super useful imports for our economy. And there's the third part, which is not useful, and that's one that I talked about. These are the parcels. These are these individual orders that the National Bank recently published some statistics. So these parcels in the first quarter of this year were $1.5 billion. So it's like $6 billion per year of imports, which is not useful for the economy at all. In any sense, most of it is not taxed. That's why the answer to the question, yes, we can do something, but to take it that part of the trade deficit, which is not bringing any special benefit for the economy. And of course, the measures that will be applying this, they should be market-based. It's not to forbid them at all, but rather to adequately tax them together with some other goods. Thank you. Thank you, Lena. I can see that my colleagues want to comment it and took questions on Q&A. I suggest now not to be, we have only 2 minutes when we need to, in case somebody can stay longer and to continue our time today, I suggest to continue it and to close this question and the next 2 questions. And now, Evgenia Slipsova of Oxford Economics, please, the floor is yours. Good afternoon to everybody. Very interesting discussion. 2 aspects which I believe what the state has not done that could be that the growth could be faster. It's not sensitive how the mobilization was done. This was already written about. In case they did it more effective, more transparent, there would not be that situation when lots of men are just hiding. That impacts the labor supply as well as the inflation and the like. And number 2, this business sentiment, that seems like the government is working, is being very powerful on reforms, but as they say, the fish rods from the head. These anti-corruption reforms, which we don't see them, actually we have seen the regress, but that has deteriorated the situation significantly throughout the last year, and I believe also has to influence on business sentiments. That's all. Because all of these factors that Olena has mentioned, that's definitely everything also matters.
Дякую. Я навіть пам'ятаю, як ми
Thank you. I
обговорювали
do remember when we discussed the
бронювання, що треба забронювати
barriers for business, people said about reservation from mobilization. That was one of the reasons that the business was complaining about.
Дякую, Олена.
Thank you, Olena. I would agree to what Olena has said in terms of that it's not so much the fault of the government because we have some objective factors. Still, I also believe that it could be done better, or some reforms can be speeded up, and to grow the investment attractiveness of Ukraine, because this is so much important in order to grow capital and to grow productivity of labor. And we have this mantra about productivity of labor. Very often it is being remembered. So for this, it's important to have anti-corruption reforms, and their outflow negatively impacts the image and the wish of people to come here. Yes, this is a problem. Also, it's evident that always there is Russia that is shelling these small private businesses. Since recently we have seen more messages that small businesses are ruined to produce coffee, to produce cheese, to produce something else, that the warehouses were bombed. And that, of course, that takes away from this attractiveness. To say that the government has not done something here, it's not very fair. Yes, of course, it could be, the government could have done better. Where they could really done better, that's exactly in the labor market and with the human capital. They should have worked better. We have a huge demand for reskilling. We have a big demand for matching of people's skills with the needs of the market. We have a big demand to help the vulnerable categories of the population, IDPs, pensioners, veterans, people with disability, so they would also participate in the labor market. And for this, you need to make a certain reprocessing of the whole public agreement. And correspondingly, the response aimed at the engagement of these people and assistance to come into this market, labor market, improving inclusivity in business and the like. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Дякую, Дмитро.
Thank you, Dmitro. Alexandra, please.
Я згодна з колегами про те, що
I
справді
would agree with
найголовніший
colleagues
ворог
that
на
really,
сьогодні
truly
це
our
Росія, і
main
війна
enemy
це
is
головна
Russia, and
категорія,
the war
яка, в
is the
принципі,
main
якраз
category
і робить
that is basically
більш
making
нагальними, я би сказала, окремі реформи
these
і підходи.
questions,
Тобто навіть
these
точкові кроки,
reforms
якщо їх об'єднати всіх
urgent.
загалом, вони би
In
могли
case
дати
we
якийсь
unite them
результат,
all,
і
they could
наше
give
оце
a good
зростання могло
result,
б
and our
пов'язано
growth
бути оцими точковими
could be
кроками.
connected with
Частково про них
these
вже згадали. Я би
points.
знову-таки
Partially they were
наголосила, що ринок
recollected,
праці
but
це
I
важливо,
again
і ми
would
говорили про це ще
emphasize
роки
on the labor
тому.
market.
В
It's
нас
important, and we talked
внутрішньо
about it.
переміщені особи їдуть в
We
одні
have
регіони, релокуються, бізнес в інші регіони, в нас немає мечного метода.
IDPs,
І
we
це
don't
те, що
have the
уряд міг би
matching,
зробити, в принципі,
the
нарешті
business
зробити
not
платформу
relocated,
такого,
and this is
скажімо
something
так,
that
співвідношення,
the
щоб все ж
government
таки
could do,
ВПО
some
і бізнес
platform, so
зустрілися.
that
Для цього,
IDPs
справді,
and
як я
business could
згодна дуже з
meet.
Дмитром,
I
дуже
would
важливі
also agree
програми
with Dmitro,
перекваліфікації
very important
з уряду
requalification
щось
programs,
робить.
and the government
Запущені
is
певні
doing
програми,
something
але в мене
here. Some
враження, що
programs are
запущені досить
started,
легкі
but it
програми для
seems that
уряду,
they launched
наприклад, ті
very
саме
light programs for the
водійки
government,
великих
such
машин,
as for the
а
female
водночас не
drivers
запущені
of
більш
some big
складні
trucks,
механізми
but more
і
complicated
центри
mechanisms are not
державного фонду
launched.
зайнятості,
And
вони не
aid
повністю
centers of the
працюють і
labor
можна було б запустити вже ще
employment
більше.
service, they're
Але
not
Державна
working
служба
well
зайнятості
enough.
забрали гроші,
But the
які могли би
state
пустити
employment
людина в ці
service
центри і на
was taking money
працевлаштування
off
працівників,
that could be used for the
забрали на
employment of these
програму національний
employees.
кешбек. Тобто тут ми
They
або
put this
називаємо
money
це
to the national
рухомоплатіжка,
cashback
тому тут
program.
треба якось
So we do
зважати
either
на
this
це.
or that, so we have to take
Також,
that
знову
into
ж таки,
account.
якщо ми говоримо,
Also,
справді
once
в
again,
нас
if we talk
мільйон людей
about,
приблизно з
we have
різними
1 million of
ознаками,
people
люди з
in
інвалідністю,
various
вони
through various assessment, people with disability, they are not working, they are beyond the labor market. We have to make some workplaces special for them. There are some small grants, but they don't cover what is they need on the ground. So inclusion is very much necessary. Our research shows that Ukraine is still very poor at barrier-free, and the Ministry of Development to make this month of barrier-free. But we now see in the recovery and reconstruction, our grant colleague wrote a story. They rebuilt the school at the expense of the European Union, but there is no shelter, and this school is not operating for 2 years. And we have quite a lot of such cases when we say some priorities are slightly under-aligned. They started the insurance of military risks or whatever investment in terms of the export credit agency, but the agency has not received the money. Not all the regulations are launched, so this mechanism is not working. So the business can't complain about damages of their businesses. So really, we don't have any payments to business in case the business has been damaged. So the business has to adapt, has to find mechanisms. It's good that the banks are going to ahead and do the lending of the business for the business that suffered from damages. So here or there, the market could do to improve the situation. But for this, we should have more coordination by various ministries, by various bodies, and that's why sometimes this coordination is
Дякую,
missing.
Олександра. Давайте вже
Thank you,
закриваємо
Alexandra.
зараз весь
Let
блок
us close
допитів
in
вийшов.
the whole circle.
Ольга, Олександр і потім
Olga,
Олександр.
Alexander,
Ольга.
and Oksana. Olga,
Дякую. Я
please.
дуже коротко.
Very briefly,
Я розумію, що є
I
певні
understand
сфери,
that
де
there are
уряд міг би
certain
щось зробити
areas where the
краще, але
government could do better,
якщо подивитися
but
з
in case we look
мета назовні, якщо подивитися,
from this helicopter
я
view,
думаю, що
I believe that
додаткові реформи, які б уряд не міг зробити, чи,
these
наприклад,
additional
в
reforms that
фіскальному
the government
секторі,
could
що
do,
можна було там
either in the fiscal
нові
sector,
вироби провести
so
значно
to
швидше,
improve
таке інше, але це
excise
все
taxes.
як крапля в
So
океані.
all of it
Насправді,
as the drop in the
головні
ocean.
ризики, головні
In
проблеми
reality, the
і
main
доля
risks, the main
України,
problems, and
як
the
це цинічно звучало, вона
fate of
вирішується
Ukraine,
на
no matter how
геополітичній
cynical
арені, і
it may sound, it
потрібно
is really
keep it in mind,
going on
коли
the
ми
geopolitical
проблеми
arena, and we have to keep in mind
неефективності українського
when we
уряду,
address the
тому
problems
що
of effectiveness or
ресурсів
non-effectiveness
дуже
of the
мало,
Ukrainian
і
market, because the resources are very
мені здається,
small.
що велика
And it
конкуренція
seems
між
to me
різними
that a
рядовими
huge competition
агенціями
between
і
various
програмами
governmental
варто
agencies
застосувати, але
to which programs then can be used.
в принципі,
But in principle,
якщо ми порівняємо Україну і Росію,
in
якщо
case
ми
we compare
порівняємо
Ukraine and
обсяги
Russia, in
допомоги,
case
які
we
Україна
compare
має
the
отримувати
volume of
від
assistance that
західних
Ukraine has to
партнерів,
receive from international
то
partners,
які не
then
були кроки уряду, вони
no matter
дуже мало що
what
можуть
could be
змінити
the
в цій
steps
картині.
of the
Можна
government, they can
зіпсувати все,
change
як
little in the picture.
недавні
Yes, they
спроби
can absolutely
з антикорупційними
damage it
агенціями, але
all,
в принципі
like it was
я не
done by
думаю, що
the
є багато
attack on the
прикладів,
anti-corruption
щоб це
agencies.
щось
But
кардинально
much is done
український
in
уряд
terms of
змінив минулого року
critics. I mean,
в плані
not much that the
обороноздатності
Ukrainian
України
government
і
could
економічного
change last
зростання.
year
І я
in terms of
коротко
the
тільки хотіла прокоментувати там
defense
питання про
and economic
велике сальдо
growth.
поточного
I just
рахунку,
wanted to comment a big
від'ємне, так?
balance,
Це сама по собі
this
цифра,
negative balance of
вона
the trade
нічого не значить, це тотожність, так?
deficit.
Тобто це
This figure
означає,
itself
що
doesn't mean much. It just means
що по
that
капітальному рахунку буде
in
великий
terms of the
приток
capital
коштів,
account,
тільки
there will be a
і
huge
усього, тобто вона не має
inflow of money.
лякати.
So it should not scare us.
Велике від'ємне сальдо поточного
That
рахунку,
negative
якщо воно
balance
триває
of the current
роками,
account,
немає
in case it lasts for
приватного
years,
капіталу,
doesn't have the
спрямовані
private
в
capital
орієнтовані
that
сектори,
is
за
aimed
мирних
at
умов. Тоді це
expert-focused
вже є
sectors under
проблемою
peaceful
для
conditions, then it is a problem.
макростабільності
Then
країни,
it is a
але
problem for
в
the macro
умовах
stability of the
війни, я
country.
думаю, що
But
це
in
не
the
має
conditions of the war,
додаткового
that
турбувати.
does not
Це не є причиною
make
для
should not make anybody concerned.
стурбованості.
This should not be the reason for concern.
Дякую, Оля, дякую, що ти
Thank
це
you, Olga.
прокоментувала.
Thank you for
Олександр
commenting
перший,
this,
Олександр.
Alexander, and then Alexander.
Ну, якщо говорити
In
про
case we
економічне
talk
зростання,
about the
так,
economic
то
growth,
тут ніби нічого нового ніхто
it
ще
seems
не
like nothing
придумав.
new.
Є два фактори. Це
Nobody
робоча
came up
сила і
with anything new.
капітал.
There's
Ну,
the
і там
workforce
є
and the
похідні,
capital.
там
And
продуктивність
there are
праці,
some
інновації
other
і так далі.
things like
Про робочу
innovations,
силу
labor
Дмитро
productivity,
дуже
about the
добре
workforce.
сказав. Так,
Dmitro
я
said very
єдине
good.
додам, що
The
дійсно
only
нам
thing that I
потрібно
should add
максимально
that we need
використовувати
to use as much as possible
той ресурс, який у нас є
that
всередині
resource
країни.
that we
Тобто,
have
що
inside the
розраховувати
country,
на оці
because to count
повернення,
on
там, як
these
повернути і
returns,
так далі,
how
це
to return,
немає
you know,
ніякого
this
сенсу.
is
Це
not that much of a
дуже
sense.
непродуктивна буде
That
дискусія.
is a very
Якщо
unproductive
говорити
discussion.
про
In case we talk
капітал,
about
тобто
the
дійсно
capital,
основна
then
проблема
yes, the
це
main problem
ризики.
is the risks,
Ризики, що там
risks
вкладені кошти,
that
вони будуть
invested money can
фактично
be
там якимось одним ударом
basically
повністю знищені і так далі.
with one attack
І
they could be fully destroyed,
страхування
and
всіх
insurance
ризиків
of all
це,
risks.
напевне, головне питання, яке
That's
потрібно вже
mostly
негайно
the
вирішувати.
biggest question that
Але я би
needs
ще
an
додав,
urgent
що у
resolution.
нас,
But I
наприклад,
would also like to add,
Олена
like
згадувала,
for instance,
так,
Olena has
інвестиції
recollected
в енергетику.
about the
У
investments
нас
into
зараз
the
дійсно
energy
відбувається
sector.
бум
Now we are
інвестицій в
seeing the
енергетику.
boom in
І
investment
це дуже
into
хороший
energy
приклад. З чого
sector,
все
and that's a very good
почалося?
example.
Почалося з того, що
How it all started? It started
оголосило
from the point where
конкурс на
Ukrenergo
надання,
announced a competition to
фактично
provide
п'ятирічного
basically
контракту на надання
5-year
послуг з
contracts on
регулювання
providing
частоти в
providing
електромережі.
services on regulating frequency
Туди
in the
на
grid.
конкурс прийшло багато різних
Some
учасників, які
many
навіть не
different
пов'язані
participants have
були з
arrived to this
енергетикою,
competition
так,
that were
вони
not even
отримали
connected with the
п'ятирічний
energy sector.
контракт, тобто вони
They
розуміють,
received
що
a
протягом
5-year
5
contract.
років
They
вони
understand that within 5
зможуть
years
надати
they will be able to
державі
sell
певну послугу. Тобто це вони або вироблять
to
електроенергію,
the
або
state a
побудують
certain
установки зі
service. They will be
зберігання
either
електроенергії.
produce electric energy
Далі
or
ми ж
build up
бачимо, у
the
нас є
unit to
дефіцит
store energy.
електроенергії. І
Now we
ті
see that we
самі
have the
переможці
deficit of electric
конкурсу, вони
energy,
почали
so the
думати,
winners
що
of
ту
that competition
батарейку
started
чи
to
той
think
генератор
so
вони
that
можуть
generator or
використовувати
that
для
battery they could use
не тільки
for
для балансування там
not only for the
частоти,
balancing
так, але
needs
і
of the
для
of the
виробництва
frequency,
електроенергії
but
за
also for the
допомогою
production of electric energy, for the
фактично
assistance
енергобалансу.
of
І зараз ми
energy
дійсно бачимо,
balance.
що
And we're
всі
now really seeing that
інвестують
all
в
are investing
електроенергетичну галузь.
into electric energy
В чому тут був
sector.
секрет? Так,
And
це
what was the secret behind?
нівельовано було один із
This was
ризиків, що ти не
already
зможеш
one of the
продати
risks
продукцію,
was
коли ти її виробиш.
taken
Так,
away.
тобто є п'ятирічний
The
оце
risk that
простий.
once you produce
Я впевнений, що
something, you will
таке
not be able to
саме
sell it.
можна
So this
робити в тому ж
5-year
мілітеку,
offtake,
так? Тобто, якщо
same
у
you can do for
виробників,
Militech,
попри всі ризики,
Miltech.
попри всі
So
проблеми
although
буде
there are these risks, in
зрозуміло,
case the manufacturers
в них буде
understand,
впевненість, що вони
they
цю
will have
продукцію продадуть
confidence that they will
краще по
sell these
якомусь
products
гарантованому більш-менш контракту по
better
зрозумілим
through
цінам.
some guaranteed product
Інвестиції
with
туди
the
підуть,
understood prices.
не
Then the
зважаючи на
investment
ніякі
will come
ризики.
there irrespective of any
в мене все.
risks. That's
Я
all.
підтримую, теж дуже часто
I
чую,
also
що
support very
важливо
often
фіксити procurement,
that it's important
мінімізувати
to fix the
закупівлі, і
procurement,
тоді бізнесмени будуть розуміти
and
дуже
then
добре
business
свої,
people will understand really well
свої
their
можливості
market
і свою
and their
маржу.
possibilities
Олександр
and their margin. Олександр Мануїлов.
Відповідаючи на питання, що держава могла
Just
би
answering the
робити,
question, what could the state do
держава
better?
функціонує в тих
The
умовах,
state
які є.
functions in the
Важко щось
conditions that we
порадити.
have. It's
Більшість
difficult
факторів
to
впливу
advise something. The
знаходиться
majority
поза
of the
можливостями
influence
сили
factors,
держави.
they are
Єдине, що
beyond the
держава може
possibilities
зробити
of
дієвого
impact of the
у цій
country.
ситуації, це
The only
покращити
thing that the
бізнес-клімат та підтримувати
country
ринок.
could do is to improve the business
Можливо,
client and
спробувати
support the
побороти
market,
асиметрію
possibly
на
try
ринку
to
першого,
fight
коли
the
в нас багато
asymmetry in the labor
вакансій, але
market
також і
when we
багато
have lots of
ризиків. Це те,
vacancies,
що казав
but also
Олександр.
lots of resumes.
Це, напевно,
That's what Alexandra said.
перенавчання, адаптація
That is retraining,
шукачів роботи
adaptation
до нових реалій.
for the job applicants to new realities. Thank you.
Да, я би сюди, мабуть, ще
I would
розташування
also
соціального
like
житла
to
додала
put
до того, що
also
сказав Олександр.
the placement of
Зараз
social
дякую
housing.
всім.
I'd
Ми
like to
перевели
thank
час,
everybody. We have gone over
звичайно,
time,
для мене
but
буде
this
по
was very
13 хвилин.
precious additional 13
Здається,
minutes.
ми
It seems to me that
покрили багато
we have
речей,
covered lots of
про
things
які можна буде і
about
подумати,
which we could
і, можливо, щось
reflect and
впроваджувати
possibly
в життя.
something
І
to be
дякую всім,
implemented in
хто
life. I would like
приєднався
to
на
thank
цей
everybody
сьогоднішній
who
івент.
has
Я
joined
дякую
our today's
German
event.
Economic Team
I
за
would like to
підтримку.
thank German
Дякую
Economic Team
ЗСУ
for the support.
за те, що
Thank you,
взагалі
the armed
є
forces, that
можливими
at
і
all we have the
факти,
possibility
і
as a
відбуваються
fact
такі
and as a
розговори
situation
про
to
українську
have such
економіку.
discussions
Будь
about the
ласка,
Ukrainian economy.
донатьте
Please
на
make
донатів
donations
підтримати свої близькі
to
підрозділи.
Laleka. Please
Донатити
support
гривень.
the units, military units, and
До
have a nice
побачення.
day.